Hey everyone, my name is Omid Kamangar and I'm back with another video tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at arrow functions. Arrow functions were one of the nicest additions to ES6, and they enable us to write more clear and less verbose code. Here I have created an empty HTML document, and at the bottom of the page I have included a JavaScript file called app.js. Inside app.js I have no code, it's blank for now. And on the left side I have opened the HTML document in Chrome and also opened the developer tools below. Imagine that we are writing a CMS for our blog, and we are tired of hard coding the URLs, and we have decided to write a URL helper. A URL helper would help us generate URLs for different routes that we have using some helper functions. Let's write those helper functions. The first thing that we need is to have the base URL of our website stored somewhere. In this case, I'll just store it in a const, so https kamangar.me. This is my personal website, and let's imagine we have a post component in our CMS. In a real world CMS, we would have different components. We would have comments, we would have images, we would have pages, maybe videos, but let's just keep it simple and imagine that we just have posts. Let's create a sample post, let post, and we'll use the simple object as our post here. So we would have an ID, like for example 23. We'd have a title, learn JS with Omid, for example, and we want a slug, and a slug would be some kind of a unique identifier for this post. And the reason we need a slug is when we generate a route, we want something like this. We want something like https kamangar.me/posts/ and then something to specify which post we want to visit. In this case, I could use just the ID and say, for example, 23. But for SEO purposes, it would be better to include the title here, and we need to have a slugified version of this title. For example, learn JS with Omid, something like this. So we would have the slug here. Let me just copy paste here. Okay, and this would be a sample post. Again, if we have a database, we would get the ID from the database. It would be an auto increment integer or something like that, something unique. But to keep things simple here, I'll just comment out the ID here and the title. We don't need them for now, and I'm going to write an ID function. So const ID equals, it's a function, and it returns a number, math.random, and it would be like a number between 1 and 100, and we want to use math.ceil, so we would have an integer. So this would give us some random numbers, which we assume that it gives us the ID of the post, and we can use it here. So I'll use backticks to keep things simple, and I can interpolate variables and expressions here. So I'll call I just call the ID function, and now we're fine. Next, we want to write a URL helper, some kind of function to generate a route like this. So again, function get post URL, and it would accept a post, and return. Again, I'm going to use backticks because I want to interpolate variables in here. First would come the base URL that we have above, this URL, and then followed by a slash, and then followed by the followed by posts, and followed by the posts log. Okay, we have a post here, and let's see the output of the get post URL function on that post. So I just console.log get post URL and pass in the post. If I reload the page, you can see that it generates the URL for us. Now that we have the URL helper, we want to go a step further and have some kind of mechanism to log when a user has visited a page on our blog or website. So I'll write a function called log. I wrote this function in the video where I talked about default parameters in JavaScript. You can click on the link in the pop-up to go to that video and watch it. I'll just use the same code here. So I will have a message and a log level, and the log level would default to info. And in a real world situation, in a real world project, this log function would write to a file on the file system. But here I'm going to keep it simple and just imagine that all I need to do is console log the message and the log level. So again, I'm going to use backticks. I will console log the log level followed by a colon and then followed by the actual message that we have. And instead of just console logging the get post URL, the output of the get post URL, I'm going to use my own log function that I wrote, and I'm going to log a better message. So again, using backticks here, I say user visited and the URL that we have. So if I reload the page, you can see that it says info, user visited, and this URL that we have here. So far, we have written what we want. We have the URL helper, we have the log function, we have an ID function which generates, let's say, random numbers instead of IDs for us. But imagine that we write the CMS and we end up writing tens or maybe hundreds of URL helpers like this. And this file would get very ugly. It would be very verbose. And in that case, we could make it less verbose and clearer using arrow functions. So let's do that here. The syntax for an arrow function is like this. We would have the parameters, the list of parameters like param 1, param 2, and so on inside parentheses, and then followed by what we call a fat arrow, and then the body of the function would come in curly brackets. So this is the syntax. This is the syntax for writing an arrow function. Let's convert the functions that we have here to arrow functions. So I'll just comment out these lines here. The first one that we have is the ID function. I no longer need the function keyword, so I'll get rid of it. And then after the parentheses, I provide the fat arrow. And whenever we have a one-line function which returns a value, we can get rid of the curly brackets, move the function body to the previous line, to the same line as the function expression itself, and remove the return keyword too. So this is a much shorter version of the ID function. And next we have the get post URL. This one is a function declaration and not a function expression, so it's a little bit different. The first thing we need to do is make it a function expression, just like the ID function. So get post URL and it equals an arrow function, and it accepts the post object that we have as the parameter. Again, this is a one-line function. We can get rid of the curly brackets, and we can move the body of the function to the previous line, and also get rid of the return statement. So again, as you can see, this is much shorter. Let me reload the page, and it says post is not a function. I forgot the arrow, the fat arrow. So reload again, and everything works fine. Next is the log function. Again, this is a function declaration, just like what we had for get post URL, and this one takes 2 parameters. And all I need to do is make it a function expression. Const log equals, it's an arrow function taking accepting 2 parameters, and then followed by fat arrow. And again, this is just one line, so I can get rid of the curly brackets, move the function body to the previous line, and have everything all in one line. And again, I reload the page, and everything works fine. Okay, by now you should be able to see how arrow functions can help us to write shorter, cleaner code. Another benefit of writing arrow functions is that we no longer have the what I call this nightmare we had with normal functions. Let me show you this by an example. Let's say we want to write a constructor which would help us create post objects and not write posts like this in using the object literal. A constructor for creating posts would look like this. Function post, it accepts a title, and the first thing that I need to do is assign an ID to this post. So this.id equals, and I'll just call the ID function that we have. And next, I want to store the title that is passed in. So this.title equals title. We need to generate slogs for this post, and I want to have a getSlog function on these posts, on the post objects that I create. So return an object, and that object would have a getSlog, which is itself is a function, and it returns a string. And again, I'm using backticks here. The first thing is I need the ID followed by a dash, and then followed by the slug. And the slug would be the title converted to lowercase. And then I'll use the replace function to replace all the white spaces with dashes. And we are good. One thing to note here is this will only replace the first occurrence of a white space. So if I have learn.js with omit, this will replace the first white space. And I need to pass in the G flag to make it a global replacement. So now with the G, it will replace all the white spaces. And we have the constructor here. So instead of just creating an object literal, let's use the constructor. Let's just refresh the page to see if everything's working. Yes. Now I'll use the post constructor that I created here. So let post equals new post, and the title would be learn JS with omit. If I reload the page, it says info user visited undefined. And let's see why. Because the reason is here I'm calling slug and not getSlog, so I need to call the function that I have, and again reload the page, and I get an error. It says cannot read property to lowercase of undefined, and the reason is that it's trying to access the title on this object, but it fails. And let me show you why. If I console.log this here, and also console.log this inside the slog function, I'll comment out the return statement for now because I don't want to get the error message. If I reload the page, and you see that the first console log, it logs out the post object that we have. But if I call post.getSlog, it outputs a different object, and that's why it is failing. Because we are writing a new function here, it generates a new lexical scope, and then the value that we have for this here would be different from the value that we have for this object inside the post, and that's why it is failing. And if I use an arrow function, the value for this object inside the getSlog would be the same as the one that we have up here. So let's get rid of the function keyword, and then getSlog would be an arrow function, and I don't need the console log here and neither here. Again, this is one line of code, so I can get rid of the curly brackets here and here. And I can also move the function body to the previous line and also get rid of the return keyword. Now, if I reload the page, you can see that it says info user visited HTTPS and then the ID and followed by the slug. And if I call post.getSlog, you can see that it has the correct slug here. Okay, I think that'll do it for this video. In future videos, I will talk more about arrow functions and I will use them more, especially with the new array functions that we have. But for now, I think that's it. I hope you have enjoyed this video and you find it useful. Stay tuned and see you in the next one.